What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Paranormal Council, and we have another great show lined up for you guys. So I'm excited. We're going to be talking about divination, and this is a very important part of our history and even possibly modern times. We're going to get into all of that. So if you want to know a lot more about divination, you're definitely not going to want to miss this episode. And speaking of which, real quick, guys, like and subscribe and share. That helps us out on everything. And thank you, guys, for joining us. So, divination, I'm going to start us out with the technical definition. I always like to go with the technical definition. So, when people look it up themselves, what are they going to see, right? So basically, the technical definition is divination is the practice of attempting to gain hidden knowledge, predict future events, or interpret omens through supernatural, occult, or symbolic means. Okay, so you could also, there's going to be, I think, a little more nuance to that as well, but that's just obviously the definition. But you can look at it as in terms of like even like a universal quest for answers. A way to navigate the uncertainties of life. So divination goes back, and I'm going to kick us off here a little bit with divination goes all the way back to actual prehistoric times. Our prehistoric ancestors started the use of divination because they started to study and observe nature. They were observing patterns of animals and the patterns of weather and wind, and even eventually the stars. They started to utilize the stars, and of course, weather, wind recognition, animal migration patterns. All of these things were a process because they really had to use it for survival. you know, when we were hunters, we needed to know where to migrate and where to hunt to. Later, as we introduced agriculture, we need to know when we could plant crops. And that's vital because back in the day, you lost crops. There was no grocery store. You lose crops, you lose a village sometimes or a ton of people. So it was crucial and very much a part of survival. So mankind, was using divination as a way to observe their surroundings. Again, animals, nature, the sky, the stars, to try to find meaning in life, to predict things, to predict weather, and also spiritual answers for the divine, right? Thus, the word divination. It wasn't until about the Mesopotamia time frames with Babylon, like when we started to really get some documentation and became sort of standardized on how to do some things. And we started getting into like, they were reading like sheep livers, things like that. I forget the name of it. What was it called when they do sheep livers and stuff like that? Entrails.
Entrails.
Yeah, heresy. Yeah, it's like heresy or something like that. But anyway, so yeah, so that was some of the very first divinations, along with maybe the Chinese, which were doing the bones, the oracle bones. They would take ox bone, like shoulder bone, and even turtles, like turtle shells, and the like back then the kings and nobles of China, they would write questions and like whatever they needed to answer, they would inscribe those onto the bones, and then like the shaman or like the diviners would basically heat up the bones to the point where they would start to crack, and then based on those cracks, there was a science to it. Basically they had learned the cracks and all these things, and it would generate prophecies or answers. So that's just to kind of get us started, guys. I want to go around and see what you guys think about some. If you guys want to talk about some other ancient traditions or divination in general, guys, how are you doing? Who wants to go first? Nice. Don't jump in there at once.
Well, you're talking about ancient traditions. Some of that is still carried forward today. It's not just stuff that they did back in the day.
Yes.
I Ching is a variation of what you were just talking about with the Chinese. The sticks that they use, today they're made out of bamboo, but before they were made out of bone, and they would carve the different answers, or uh, basically um, chapters of their manuscripts of what to look at, of what any particular prophecy was, and had a numerical value attached to it as well.
Right.
Um, I
For those of you
personally,
like wondering about I Ching, like what Stacy's talking about, it's like for those of you that know the yin and yang symbol, it's a very balanced set and like yin yang, and it's a very hexagonal, graphical hexagonal system as well. But
yeah,
anyways, go ahead, Stacey.
yeah, and they basically have all of these bones or these sticks inside of a tube that is made out of bamboo, and they shake it and they keep shaking it until one of them falls out, and then they actually read it from there. Which one fell out? This is the question, or this is the answer to your question, and it's usually very fortune cookie in the way that it comes out, as far as the answer is concerned, because well, it has to basically catch everything. um, but it is revered throughout China through this day. I mean, people use it as part of the religion. Personally, I use a system that's from the Congo, uh, called Chomalongo, which is basically four coconut shells that are cut into basically silver dollar size, uh, and you th- sh- do a prayer, and then you drop them, two times in a row, and it gives you an answer of yes and no based off of whatever question you have. And it only does yes and no in that, but you also get yes, no, and maybe, which is because there's four shells, and four shells can fall down in various combinations, and based off those combinations it's yes, no, and maybe, which usually means ask the question better, because a lot of times
Mhm.
people who ask questions, they're open-ended, and it could be a yes but technically no, or technically no but a yes, that kind of thing. So you have to actually rephrase the question that is distinctive binary, and then you get it.
Yeah. Now, I will say, like, divination was, it was, again, it was part of everybody's life. I mean, it dictated everything, and it got to the point, even in like ancient Greece times, like around the 8th century BC, you had like your Oracle of Delphi, this high priestess that literally like sat in this like golden tripod over these like cracks and fissures, like in the was it the Apollo
Hmm.
temple of Apollo, and literally like she would get these, like she would enter this trance state and she would speak these words. They weren't always like structured, the way we might think, but people would take those and literally, she was like the most popular back then. Like it was crazy. Like, and she would consult everything, all matter of military, politics, everything was being consulted. Even at some point, they say Alexander the Great even went to the the Oracle of Delphi to find out, to before his conquest of Persia.
Hmm.
So, and he had gotten an answer from that. Now, there's some different stories of that, but because some say he dragged her to the temple by her hair. He was being impatient, but then some people say that might have been out of character. So, who knows? But either way, divination again was huge in those times. Again, so uh, that's what I find fascinating is how much society utilized this for thousands of years, and different, and all around the world, different cultures were using different forms of divination or even similar forms. It's crazy. Even the Romans, they actually went back to the Haruspice, with the reading the entrails, basically, the livers of sheep, like sacrificed animals. But they also had augurs as well, which interpreted signs from God, and they did a lot with specifically like birds, the pattern of birds. There was even one Roman general that did not listen when the chicken was like, "No, it's not time for battle," and he's like, "Whatever, I'm not going to listen to that augur." And so he went and he lost. And so it was well documented that hey, he didn't have the divine um, permission. So it's really crazy to see all that. So, guys, I don't want to just keep hogging up with a whole documentary on divination, but if you guys want to jump in there and add your 2 cents.
Jim, go ahead.
Well, the divination, not just in those cultures, but it's biblical too. The whole idea of casting lots, a lot of the wars that we've been fighting over in religion in the Middle East really date back to over 2,000 years ago when divination was used to carve out lots for who owned what in the Middle East. River to the sea, all that kind of stuff that you hear today. That was all, words of God in according to the Bible, and that's what divination really was. What was allowed, who was in court, even who was guilty and who was innocent. It was one of the things that early Christians and Puritans banned outright was all sorts of divination, and throwing dice was essentially casting lots, which is why gambling even today is banned in a lot of areas, because it started off as a sin to throw dice in divination and essentially make money doing it. So they banned it in the New World essentially from the get-go, because casting lots was a big no-no.
Yeah, I think it was the around the 4th century Constantine time frame is when the Christian um, started to ban pagan rituals like divination stuff.
Well, I'm going to jump in on this because it's absolutely true. I want to set the stage with that. I think to understand divination, people are calling out the spirits. Let's get that on the table. They're not. It's not just they're speaking to the universe. They're calling out to the universe and the spirits that's there. Um, and Christians, the Jewish people did this too, but they did it to God only. So when they're casting lots, they're not casting lots to, let's say, Diana or to Hecate or to anybody else. In fact, in Deuteronomy, one of the very first laws, Deuteronomy 18, tells us all the different types of and people that deal with divination, that we're not to do those things, but we can do those things calling out to the Lord. So, like for example, um, the liver reading. I don't know if y'all have ever really studied that ritual or not. And I've actually been around people who's done that ritual. They actually breed that animal for a particular reason, and they pray over the breeding of that animal, and they pray over that animal for a long period of time. So whatever spirit they're calling to, they're asking that spirit to fill that animal full of life and full of the answers that they're going to need. And at the time that it's called for to bring forth to kill the animal, they do particular cleansing rituals. They do particular killing ritual. They kill it, and then when they drop it open, depends on which side the animal drops. It gets a certain sign. It depends on how much blood is seen as a certain sign. Um, and I'm not going to go into the rest of the ritual, but a lot of that
Right.
ritual comes forth. And so they're asking the spirits of that animal, or that spirit that's giving the answers to that animal or to the bone. And that's why they use the bone, because the bones are very ritualized through that life of that animal or human. It wasn't just animals. They actually done it to humans too. I know a lot of the ancient Aztec type of things that even I've even seen it done in modern day, believe it or not, has been done. And so they're calling upon that, coming back to the Christian side of that. The Christians, much least, I mean, the Israelites didn't do the liver as much, but they did do the bones, and they were asking God, their God, to show them the answers. And so I'll kind of leave it there, but that's kind of what's going on with that.
Yeah. That's why dice is called throwing the bones.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you were dead on when you said a lot of places still don't want to do the gambling. You don't see that much in the Hebrew or Christian nations. It's mostly the Muslim or some of the believe it or not, the Thai belief systems are kind of against it too. So.
Yeah, and I want to kind of go back a little bit too as we get into pre-biblical era as well. Going back even to the Romans, I think we see a big shift in, we kind of wonder like how did the church become so powerful back in the day as well, and it was through things like divination, but of course even later with the church and stuff like that. But before that, you actually had people like Julius Caesar. Actually, not a lot of people always realize, but he was actually an augur. He was a diviner, basically, right? And then through prophecy that he tended to use, he was able to use that to manipulate himself into power, and so he crossed the Rubicon, And so I think this was a major example of people now starting to really use something like the power of divination in that sense with the people and prophecies, and how much that people believed in those to use it for personal gain and things like that. So I just wanted to throw that out there too, because again, not a lot of people always realize that part of like Julius Caesar. So it's definitely interesting to see that. And of course, it's easy to see when you have that type of power, and everybody back then lived for, or they loved prophecies. And because another thing too is that you got to remember, it's not just that people wanted to know the future. Like, it wasn't just about knowing the future. It's almost like getting permission from God. So if you're a general, for example, and you wanted to attack, your soldiers they wanted to know, like, wait, is this a divine act? Do we have permission from the gods, or whatever? That's how they were back then. So when they could say to their soldiers, or hey, that we or the like, we have the sign, it's written in the stars today, or whatever the case was, when they had permission from the diviner, augur or shaman, however you wanted to label them, when they got those permissions, that's when they attacked. They planned their attacks. They planned who took office, like who took kingships and appointments or anointments and everything else. Everything was all done according to divination. And if things weren't done because of divination, like with eclipses and things like that, the eclipses were often viewed as an upcoming doom event. So, you would have things that weren't done because there was an eclipse or things like that. So yeah, divination for thousands of years has been a huge part of people's lives. And of course, in these last few thousand years, it has diminished, but it's still around. And I think Stacy was alluding to some stuff. There is modern versions of divination, which we will definitely get into, and we'll talk about those and things like that. I guess, Sean was talking a little bit about the Aztecs, human sacrifice. I think it's important to realize that a lot of these cultures had their own beliefs. They would usually sacrifice, whether it was an animal, as maybe even Sean was saying, these animals that were prepped and then sacrificed, and then they were read for divination, whatever the purpose was, or whether it was humans, things like that. Um, but also, do again, remember, keep in mind too that also divination was about studying. It wasn't always just sacrifice. It was also studying bird patterns, migration patterns, the wind, the stars, star alignments, whether Saturn was around or Mars, or certain planets were in certain positions. We even talk about Mercury retrograde and stuff like that nowadays. So, um, astrology is huge, and this is stuff that's been documented, like what Sean was talking about too, like even the liver readings and the intro readings. They're like literally from thousands of years ago when they first started doing it. They were meticulously documenting, like in these clay tablets, things like that. They would actually document all their findings, and it was a very well documented thing, and it was actually part of what we consider pseudoscience, but back then it was science. Like as they was going through, they were learning about the stars, they were learning about different things. Then they got into alchemy, right? Alchemy was huge and part of divination as well. You even had people, and not a lot of people may even realize this too, because sometimes you hear the name Isaac Newton, right? Well, guess what, guys? Isaac Newton spent probably 60% of his time doing occult stuff, okay? Doing alchemy and astrology and things like that, and he did not really distinguish between the two. Like he thought everything went hand in hand. But again, alchemy was the basis of a lot of chemistry that we have nowadays. Even though, yes, maybe back then they were trying to do other things with it and make lead into gold, and like they were trying to find ways to, extend life and all these other crazy things, or who knows, potions and all kinds of stuff. But it really did become the foundation of a lot of science, and eventually, like I said, then became considered pseudoscience later on when we took over with the new scientific standards. So, guys, I know it's a lot of education. See, divination is like a lot of just you know education type stuff. But all right, so for the sake of the folks at home too, let's get into some modern stuff. All right, because I know you guys are itching to, so we can still connect some things back to the thing. So, guys, maybe tarot cards, right? Tarot cards goes back to the 15th century, Italy card game, and then Europe changed it into the rest of Europe. Eventually, made it into the divination tools that we still use to this day, and has spread through all the many cultures. Even Japan has tarot decks with anime. So,
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of jump in here a little bit. I know I've been kind of quiet. I've been taking notes because this is, especially the history of divination. I don't, I don't have a lot of knowledge in. That's something that I just haven't really studied much of. I don't have any experience with a lot of it, nor do I plan on having experience with it. Um, but I have used some of the more modern techniques. I have worked with those. I've learned how to use tarot cards, things like that. It's not something I practice in. It's not something that I use regularly. It's a tool. I've learned about it because it's common practice in the paranormal field as well as in the spiritual field. Um, and so my experiences with divination, different types of divinations, things like that, are very different and I would say limited. I'm not going to lie. I'm not the most knowledgeable in it. I did want to touch on something that Sean said, and this has been a question that has been something that I have struggled with, and a number of other people that I have talked to as well struggle with it. And it's this concept, and I'm not sure if it's a Christian concept or if it's a um, worldview concept or historical concept of God versus the universe. And it seems like there is a definite like line drawn, right? And as a Christian, I believe in God. I believe, he's the creator of the universe. I believe that he's alive and well and living. And so it's like, it's hard for me because to me, if you don't look at the universe and acknowledge all the parts of it and how it was created and how it's being used and what's available in the universe for purposes, it's almost like denying God's existence, God's creation, his handiwork in it, his plan and purpose for it. And so it's a struggle for a lot of people to understand. A lot of people say, oh, working with the universe, working with the energies of the universe. And to a lot of Christians who work in the paranormal, that's something that is hard to understand or explain to people because there's a feeling that like by acknowledging this design and this living being, the universe that he's part of, that he created, we're also acknowledging him and he's the center focus of that. And so I don't know, I know it's kind of off topic, but it's also like divination, right? All these things were provided and people have been using them for thousands of years for these purposes. So it is kind of related.
Well, I'll jump in real quick and then get some other people's take. So what the Christian would say in this respect, or what I say, is God, the creator, created the universe. Now, the universe itself can be, and we see that things have spirit. There are spirits inside this universe. But so the qualifying thing is when I use the term universe, I'm not talking about a universal spirit like the New Agers talk about. That universal spirit that they don't want to recognize the God of the Bible. They want to recognize a universal spirit overall. We kind of see this with some of the Native American. We also see this with Utes and then also the Ural Mountains of Russia. We see these kind of concepts of creating the consciousness and the universe. And so that's a big distinction for the Christian. The Christian is not going to say that God is universe. God is separate from the universe. And that's why we would say it. The universe is a created thing. God's not a created thing. And I hope that helps. But anyway, that's where I'll leave it.
Yeah, I would say that it more of a strict version of that would be, and again, I'm no preacher or anything like that, but I think a lot of times what I hear from other people in the church is that pretty much a lot of things that happened before Jesus Christ was different. There was different covenant with God, and there was a lot of different things that happened. But then with Jesus Christ, that became the new covenant. And so all that other stuff, was like, okay, here's the rules. Like, here's the stuff you don't do. And then, the path to God is through Jesus Christ. And that's just kind of like the simple, what it all boils down to. So pretty much a lot of the stuff, like even that I do on a regular basis, even though I'm skirting the line, it's still sinning, and so I have to, always, walk that line and ask for forgiveness all the time, for those things. But that's kind of like the strict, what I get from the church usually answers. So
yeah, well,
I'm sure.
Again, you're right. And I get that. And I'm kind of saying the same thing in a way, but I want to make clear what Jen was proposing there, and I think is a question for a lot of people, is a lot of people, even Christians in churches, equate a lot of the New Age stuff with the Bible, and because they don't really know that God is not a part of the universe. He's created it. He's injected himself into parts of it, but he's not the universe. And that's the idea there in the Old Testament, same concept. So, but yeah, kind of coming back to something else, kind of getting back to divination there. again, when we have the Old Testament talking about casting lots, they even casted lots for Jesus's clothes, like Stacy was saying earlier, land, and like you were saying earlier, I wanted to bring up this. There used to be the Raymond's calendar, or the it usually tells you when you can plant the gardens and stuff like that.
Almanac?
Yeah, almanac. Yeah, they quit making that a few years ago, but I always looked at it to see when I was going to go fishing. So, but that they're using it more, like you said. Divination was not just sacrificing animals and stuff like that. It was many other things, looking at the signs, looking at all the other things. So.
Yeah, and you could actually go back and say that, yeah, early forms of divination, well, again, prehistoric times, things like that, a lot of it was figuring out how Earth and even the divine, where the Earth and divine met, but also, yeah, like reading the stars, trying to, basically pay attention to your surroundings, right? And learn, does these things mean something when the birds fly south or whatever, right? So some of it wasn't necessarily just like that they were doing a ritual to a certain spirit or whatever. Some of it was just observation and learning and the quest for knowledge in that sense. And I think that the evolution over time, even to modern, is it doesn't seem that people necessarily want that sort of like where something is cast and it's like, this is foretold, this is how it is, blah, blah, blah. Whereas now, Stacy brought up like I Ching, like the yin and yang philosophies, and also, which is very popular, but also even like tarot readings, psychic readings, palmistry, things like that. All these things, a lot of times now, they're not so much going to give you like a prophecy or a prophetic answer. A lot of these things are now self-reflective, very fortune cookie-esque, and they basically allow people to sort of take a stance and say, well, okay, so for example, maybe you might get a reading that says something about that you've been struggling at work and that you may find a new opportunity soon. Well, I mean, how many people on average, so confirmation bias is actually something that divination also utilizes, is confirmation bias and the placebo effect. So the combination of the two is what can allow divination to really work well for a lot of people. That's why people like to get readings and stuff, because again, they might get that reading and they say, yeah, you know what? I have been having trouble at work. And, I'm thinking of a new opportunity. Wow, that's really good. And sometimes it's empowering to them. So that placebo effect, because all along they could have had the power, right? But hearing it from that is sometimes just therapeutic. So I think sometimes, there is a place for that. Now, I'm not saying that, that should be substitution for prayer and stuff like that. Again, we can get into religious, but I think that there is a lot of helpful things that when people are going to spiritualists and things like that, and they are getting readings, if they're done correctly and honestly, then I think they're going to get basically a chance to hear something and gives them some insight on themselves. And then they're going to empower themselves. And hopefully that's going to be something positive,
Well, I want to, back up a little bit on a couple of things. The idea around astrology has been around for a very, very long time. Its origins are found in what we know as Iraq right now. The village of Saba. The name of the village means point of light or star. They're the ones that actually invented the system of astrology that we use today, or a derivative of it. They had 13 constellations instead of 12. Ophiuchus was a constellation that was a smaller slice, and it kind of made the pie, the 12 in perfect size, like a pizza pie. It doesn't look like that. It didn't look like that back then. It's actually, the system was known as the Placides chart, because Placides was the main focus of where you started your chart at And if you use the Placides chart today, most people, the vast majority of people, are not the sign, their sun sign that they are today. You know, I'm an Aquarius, but I would actually be a Pisces in the Placides chart because it literally ticks things back, you know, in the different direction. And it's far more accurate if you're going to use it for divination. But that being said, if you remember in the Bible, the nativity scene, the three wise men, it's supposed to represent the stars in the sky of Orion's belt. But in the Bible, it is somebody, he's a Magi, Saba, and Nubian. Saba, people don't know what Saba is because it's only said a few times in the Bible, but it was the ruling empire of the day. Uh, the Sabian Empire rivaled Rome. It rivaled Babylon. And if you are familiar with the Queen of Sheba, Sheba is the Hebrew pronunciation of Saba. So the Queen of Sheba is actually the Queen of Saba. And Solomon went to her and got gifts of divination on top of that. She was rewarding him for being the wisest man in the world, essentially. It was a kingly kind of gift of these tools of divination that he received. The founding fathers were heavy into astrology. If you go around Washington, D.C., there are no less than 21 astrographs carved in stone at various monuments all around Washington, D.C. And the star chart that they give is July 4th, 1776. They don't actually write the phrase out. They just have the star chart of what the sky looked like on July 4th, 1776. The founding fathers built Washington, D.C. as a giant astrograph. The streets and the way that buildings are laid out are similar to the way the stars were on July 4th, 1776. They planned that out from the get-go. George Washington chose Washington, D.C. because of what the stars said when he was basically wandering through a swamp. The guy who owned the land, his name was John Pope. He lived on a hill, the highest hill in the land, which now we call the hill where the dome is at, the Congress is at. He called that hill the Vatican. And Washington comes through the area, sees what the stars are telling him, and he's like, we have to buy this land for the country. Now, the rest of the Congress in New York at the time thought he was absolutely batshit crazy because it was a swamp. They wanted to put the capital in Pennsylvania. But he said, no, the stars say this is where we have to put it. And they're like, well, okay, let's do that then. And they drained the swamp and built Washington, D.C. Based off of the prophecy of divination of the stars. So our founding country, the founding fathers were really into it themselves, even though that it was technically, faux pas and banned. The Masons, which is what all of the founding fathers were all very heavy into astrology. The Kabbalah too, but we're not going to get into that so much.
Well, like even Nancy Reagan, she had a psychic all the time. It was like literally didn't she have like the psychic in the White House? Like,
Jean Dixon, yeah. Jean Dixon was
that's right.
Newspaper astrologer.
Sean, you're muted.
If you even look in the scripture and even other religions, you begin to see that even through time of medieval times and stuff like that, it may have been banned, but the leadership always had the astrologer or the divination guy, the woman in the background helping them. So it was always around.
Right.
Some fashion or form. So
yeah, I mean, like divination is the whole quest of the curiosity of mankind to make sense of things they can't understand. Through divination, this helps that process a little bit, and especially in those times back then. And so it was just such an integral part of everybody's lives up, and even again up until almost modern times. And even then we have a ton of people that still believe in divination in some form or another. It doesn't have to necessarily be like a crystal ball or like getting your palm read or tarot cards. I mean, again, there's other divination. People are always reading their dreams, which was actually still part of the Christian faith. When they banned divination, the Christians were still reading dreams, and but I think like what you were saying, Sean, too, what a lot of the justification was for divination around Christianity was when it was divine, when it was from God. So for them it was like, okay, well, your divination is going to some other BS, some false god, and this is divination to the Christian God. But you're right, there is people that were always in the background, and even today, like I said, like even I admit, like, hey, there's parts of what I do that technically, yes, I'm a sinner. There's things that I know I probably should not partake in, but I do it anyways in quest for my own, selfish search for the truth or whatever. And so, that's just my take.
Well, in you were talking before about divination, drifting off into the very fortune cookie kind of thing, and by and large, that's correct. But if you use the few ancient methods that still exist today, and I'll give you an example. In Santeria, one of the ancient methods they have is called a diligon, and it uses cowrie shells. Now, cowrie shells are those little bitty shells. They have the mouth that looks like
Yeah.
this, and on the other side is just round. Well, you can tap them just right, and that it has a perfect seal that will pop off. So it actually has what looks like a zero on one side and then a one on the other. And it uses a method of 16 cowrie shells, ones and zeros, and you throw these down and essentially count how many ones you have out of the 16 show up as a number. The zeros are null. It's very binary. It's the same
I don't
system.
say it's like sounds like binary code, like with the very
It's exactly,
computer
it is.
language.
It's exactly what it is, and it
Makes
uses a tree the same way that the binary code uses a tree to determine what path a switch is going to take. I know this sounds like it was something that's recently come about, but this is thousands of years old all by itself. It came out of Africa. And they didn't use cowrie shells at the time, but it was the same system with cola nuts, which have the same shape. They're flat on one side and rounded on the other, and they crack them to where it has a one and a zero. And they used the same method. And when the slaves came over, they didn't have access to that same resource, but they did have a lot of these cowrie shells lying around the beach, and they realized that it was the same damn thing. So they could the slaves used the same system on a different object, which was the cowrie shells. But it is one of these systems that a lot of these what they call babalas who do the readings, they will spend decades of their lives studying to know how to interpret a lot of these things. And recently, the University of Chicago, the Oriental Institute, uh, went out of their way to essentially write down all of the different uh, meanings of all of these different signs, because it was an oral tradition all the way up until about 20 years ago. There was it wasn't written down anywhere. It was just passed down from teacher to student orally for thousands of years, and it was as anally sacred in the way that it was passed down as a lot of the Jewish writings and the Jewish understanding of things. You had to do it particularly one way, and there was no other way. And they wrote it all down through the Oriental Institute, and it accelerated the adoption of that process because you had reference material at that point. But the process itself is incredibly accurate and very finite, because it'll take almost an hour just to get your first answer by throwing it down, counting, throwing it down, counting, throwing it down, counting. And it, from each one, you have the first 16, and then it branches down, and then you have another 16, and it branches down, and eventually you get to your answer. And it's not at all cookie cutter. It's not at all fortune cookie.
Yeah, no. Well, and like, look, let me clarify. So when I say fortune cookie, I am trying. I do not want to diminish these different forms. Because, but when I say that, as I just mean that, like, some divination takes you to prophecies and fortune telling, so to speak, whereas others tend to give you more insight into your own personal stuff in that sense. And it can be a very wide spectrum of things. Again, that's why the I Ching is so popular to this day, because it has such a vast array, um, because of the hexagrams that it uses and everything else. It there's so much that you can learn if you utilize I Ching and things like that. Just like even with tarot, when they expanded tarot and they made it into divination, they have the 22 archetypes, the major, and then you had your 56 minor cards, four different suits, representing your fire, air, water, and earth. So you have a lot of variety within those combinations and things like that to really dive into a lot of deeper meaning, again, spiritual and things like that. So again, I feel like a lot of these cultures, even like the Norse cultures with runes, when they would throw runes down and things like that, how they landed, all these things. There is all of these divinations have had experts that have studied them, have wrote them down, or maybe even not even wrote them down. Like as Stacey's talking about, some of these were just orally studied and mastered, and then passed on to their students and things like that. And those Baba Yagas, Baba Labas, Baba
Baba,
Loons.
oh yeah, Babalu. That
Yeah,
Babalu is the saint. Babalao is the priest.
but I know that they're still out in the bush, sitting around doing these things out in the bush, and they do have some ones in the urban areas doing them now, like Stacey's talking about.
Hmm.
But it's there's a lot of talk about preservation of culture, because some of these have been passed down through these cultures, and some of them are getting either bastardized or changed or evolved, and some of them evolve in a good way. Again, I think there were some things that have evolved in a good way, but then there are some things that, again, they should probably stay a certain way, and then there's some things we probably shouldn't be doing really anymore. Who knows? But all right. So who
Well,
wants
one of
to
the
chime
things
in
that
there?
is one of the things I find interesting is that science is now coming around to understanding a lot of this stuff, and it's through quantum physics. And I know people get really tired of hearing quantum this, quantum that, quantum this, but the whole idea mathematically around superposition, which is the yes, no, and maybe, that everything is in a superposition state until it's observed by a consciousness, or it is uh, solidified as an actual thing. Um, Being that the future itself is in a state of superposition. It's a possibility. All possibilities happening all at the same time. And a good example of that would be an electron that goes around an atom. We were taught in school that an electron orbits nucleus of an atom like the planets orbit the solar system. That's not how it happens. An electron will circumvent the nucleus in every position possible simultaneously, all at the same time. If you look, if you look at a atom when it's in that state, you don't see the electron, you see a cloud. It's more, it's like smoky around the whole thing because that electron is in every position around that atom simultaneously while it's happening. Only when you observe it does it collapse into a single point or a single position. That is the Schrodinger effect of, Schrodinger's cat, of the collapse of that superposition. It's either a particle or a wave, depending on whether or not it's actually observed. That superposition is what's really boggling the minds of scientists because they see that as consciousness. That this does not happen randomly. This is not Newtonian science where things exist whether we see them or not. Three scientists recently won the Nobel Peace Prize for proving that the universe doesn't actually exist the way that we think it does, which is the locally, they call it locally and non-locally. Non-locally is that things not only happen in what we see, but they're affected by things that are way beyond what we can even comprehend. Everything in the universe, every subatomic particle in the universe knows what every other subatomic particle in the universe is doing, where it's at throughout the entire span of space time. Now, that freaks scientists out because what that means, in other words, that's omniscience, that's omnipresence, that's divinity. And they can't quite get to that point, but their math shows that is consciousness, and that is the totality of the universe is consciousness first, not energy or matter. It is consciousness first. And these three guys just won the Nobel Peace Prize for being able to express that in a mathematical formula. And it's blowing a lot of theoretical scientists' minds because they have to actually grapple with the idea of divinity in science now. I'm loving it. I'm like, nah, 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 nah. That's, we knew it all the time. We told you. And you just had to wait until the math came out before you got to it. So that's where I'm at with it. I know Sean earlier just completely went the opposite way of what I just said, but
well, not really.
I'm just kind of gloating that scientists are now coming around to it because they have the math to back it up when people have been saying it since literally the beginning of time that, omniscience and omnipresence is divinity, and their math now comes out that way. So,
yeah, well, I think, quantum physics definitely is playing a part in obviously everything. And that's why probably there's going to be one of two things that's going to happen at some point in the future of the show. Either one, we're going to end up on a Polymarket prediction site of when Stacy brings up quantum physics. That'll be fun because we might be able to start winning some money. Or Chad is going to start a drinking game. But either way, I love it, and it is relevant. Like the thing is that Stacy brings up great points on that stuff. So because it everything does connect, everything connects, and I think Stacy likes to talk about the big picture, and that's what we need to all still be aware of, right? As in a science term sometimes, but also spiritual. So, but that's why we're all here. But guys, let's talk a little bit about modern divination, maybe a little bit. I know that, there may be some of us on this panel that may not endorse using any kind of divination. But also, guys, I would just say, look, my personal thing is I don't mind like tarot readings, things like that. I don't mind some of that. I think again it can be very insightful for people when they get a tarot reading. A lot of times I've performed those for people, um, and a lot of people it empowers them and it helps them on their journey, and it helps give them sometimes it gives them a chance to sometimes either like reflect on like something personal or a spiritual question. Sometimes even gain insight on something. So I just feel like some of those things are good. You could get into the weeds and say other divination could be even worse. Depending on what you use it for. But I think in general, with a lot of people using it just to find some maybe some courage or some answers on some things, some insight, I don't have a problem with.
Well, as far as modern is concerned, we're starting to, because computers are so prolific. Companies like Palantir they put themselves out there as they're an analytics company where they just scoop up lots of data and then put it all together in some kind of executive summary of whatever it is that you've got. It's very not very different than the ancient prophets for the kings.
Yeah, they got
They're,
apps now. They got apps
yeah,
now. You just put in
yeah.
your birthday. They give you your sign. They give you a reading. They send to you every day.
No, Palantir is different. Palantir is, you know what a Palantir is, right? From Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
It's the crystal ball, the black crystal ball that connected to everyone everywhere and saw everything.
scrying.
And
Scrying. I forgot. You just reminded
yeah,
me. Black scrying is another thing too. I forgot that form, but that's
yeah.
it.
Well,
Just
there's a lot.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Divination. Well, if you want to talk about the different kinds, you have the dowsing rods. That's divination. You have the pendulum, which is divination. Scrying, which is a hybrid of the pendulum method. Um, you get throwing of the bones, which is different than dice, but they actually have it's a hodgepodge of different methods based off of.
The one thing too with the fucking sorry, the tea. The tea
Yeah,
leaves or whatever, like when they're at the bottom of the cup or whatever, and the tea readings or something. I just thought of
yeah.
that one too.
I mean, you could, from all the different methods that are available in divination, it is hard to not come across at least one method in somebody's family that was the way. Um, a lot of you'll find whole families followed a particular method and they just went with it. Um, it the more I don't want to say the poorer economically the family, the more divination was actually used. Um, it's what a lot of cultures call peasant magic. Um, Aleister Crowley was very big on because he was born an aristocrat and he was in that crowd and he liked to promote that what he did was high magic, like high tea, and it allowed him to do some of the most gross and absurd things in high society and created a whole culture there from that just by calling it high magic, and everybody else's was peasant magic. um, but he used the same divination methods as the Freemasons and the Kabbalah. It wasn't anything that was higher or lower. It was just that's what he labeled it as. Um, and he was, a jerk anyway. So um, in the end, his own behavior was his own undoing by his own hand. So
Yeah, Sean, you look like you wanted to say something there.
No, just palm reading. There's many all kinds of different things that people will do. Um, the Bible talks about like 6 or 7 different types of divination and different types of people who do the divination. But a lot of the things I run upon in as far as like the what we call the fortune telling, and whether it be palm reading or looking at your eyes. I don't know if y'all have seen that a whole lot, but the eye readings, aura readings. We haven't ever heard y'all talk a lot about the auras, but a lot of people read the auras, especially if they can see into the spiritual realm type thing. But a lot of the stuff that we're talking about still goes back to the ancient. Even if it's modern, it still goes back to the ancient in many different ways.
Yeah, the aura stuff, they actually used modern, what's called Carillion photography, where you sit in a chair that has an electrical charge to it. You put your palm on a plate that is negatively charged, and they take a photograph of you with a Polaroid camera, and it will actually show your aura in the Polaroid. And it's an actual thing. They call it Carillion photography. You probably seen pictures of it on the internet where somebody's hand is on something and there's like, lightning, around the hand that's coming off of it. That is capturing the on a photo negative, that charge of your aura based off of the Carillion photography. It's kind of cool, if you ask me. I don't, read too much into it outside of, they're reading an EMF field. What those things mean, I don't know.
No, that was the first thing I thought of as soon as Sean said aura reading. I was like, photography.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first thing I thought of. But yeah. I think for me, what I find the most fascinating is just not so much, using divination for future or for prophecy. I just think for me, it's that the connection of mankind, the barrier of viewing the world as this mural of things and objects, and trying to decipher it and trying to look at patterns and symbols and where the divine meets reality. I just think there's that line right there that's really cool, on a just philosophical level of what are we here for, what the basic answers, trying to make sense of things. And that's the part of divination that fascinates me, when it comes to those things. So just wanted to share what that meant to me.
Yeah, I was thinking about, by no means, I'm the one that would probably say don't ever do divination, but that's just coming from my Christian background here. But looking at divination as far as just an overall idea, the humans, we want to see what's going to happen in the future. We want that. We strive for that. We want that. We don't like the unknowns a lot of times. I actually dealt with a situation to where someone was a seer, and we had to go through some cleansing processes with her, and we asked the Lord to kind of take away those abilities for a little bit, before she could decompress and do a lot of different things. And she talked to me a lot about the idea of not being able to see what's in a room, what's going on around her. It comes to that unknown. We don't like that unknown, and I think divination is that cry out to that unknown.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think that goes all the way back to the beginning of mankind, and because divination goes back further, like, again, like we said, prehistoric times. It's just something that mankind has utilized, as they've, really had nothing else to do but hunt and survive, and observe things and survive, and to answer the unknown questions the best they can. But I do feel like, again, divination is a, again, I'm not saying that everybody needs to. I think there is, like, if I was to give a Christian answer, I would say, that not to seek out the answers of the future, just to put your faith in Jesus Christ and the Lord, right? And not worry about the future and things like that. You know, I just kind of was talking on a bigger scale, though, to be honest with you, of my fascination of what divination meant to us as human beings and as evolution of just over us and our spiritual connections to or the pursuit of understanding that divine connection.
And let me say this too. Like I know Stacy is involved in and dealing with his ancestors and everything. I would no way in a war try to judge that in that sense, though I would say not to do it. But I think that there's this need in humanity, and I think that's important to look at as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, and I think if people come to me and they say, Josh, I know that you can do tarot readings, I wouldn't turn them down. And if they really wanted tarot reading, I would give them that to them because I do think that it's something that can help them in that sense. And then, you know, there may be other things that I may steer them to for better help. That is one thing I want to cover real quick. I know we're kind of going into overtime a little bit tonight, but there's one last subject that I really want to get into, and that is responsibility. We have a ton of people out there, and now that we got into the age of technology and divination is now sort of democratized, right? So, but let's talk about responsibility because there's a lot of power in people that do divination. So, people that if they go to a psychic, they sometimes can start to become reliant upon those things. And so there's psychics and if you want to say diviners out there that can take advantage of those things and start to give them information that may not be accurate. So, so guys, what is your take on responsibilities for these people in the divination world?
Well, you have to go at it with the baseline that you are still making the decision, regardless of what the diviner happens to say. You are responsible for your own decisions. Even though they say you should do this, you should do that, you should do this, you should do that, you still have agency. And to surrender that to someone else just willy nilly without any sort of foundation behind it, uh, especially if it's somebody you're just walking in off the street with, to some palm reader or whatever, and then just going with it, uh, you're more lost than you even realize. You need to actually take responsibility for your own stuff before you start blaming a diviner for tricking you into giving them thousands of dollars. There, there's a reason why you're a target is because you're lost and you can see it. Other people see it, and going to a tarot card reader is not going to suddenly create the epiphany.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you guys are saying. It was something I was actually going to bring up. You know, in all truth and reality, with divination, we're looking for answers, and that's foundationally something that humans have been doing always, whether it's in regard to spiritualism or what's going to happen in the future, or what is our path, what is our purpose, why are we here, what are we supposed to do? What about that new job? Should I buy a car? How many kids should I have? Everybody's always looking for answers and trying to find that right balance in life and purpose. And I do think, in my experience, being somebody who does use cards, has used cards, works with people who want to learn, to do it safely and intelligently, and when to do it, when not to do it, things like that. Um, you know, it's I do think that in the majority of cases that I've run across, and I do know a few good ones out there, I'll say that. But a lot of people, most people who do readings and divination, no matter what kind, um, that I've run across, they don't put as much focus into that responsibility. So what are we doing with this information? How are we presenting it? Why are we providing this information? Is it just I hear a lot of people who do readings say all the time, I hate reading for people. I hate it because I have to give them bad news. I have to tell them things they don't want to know about themselves or their relationships that they don't want to know. I have to call people out. I have to hold people accountable based off the readings. And I don't like being in that position. I don't like making decisions for their lives. But yet they continue to do it for everybody and anybody all the time. And almost in every case, there's a dollar amount attached to it.
Mhm.
It's a trade, it's a commodity. And it's like, well, then why are you doing it? If you don't like it, you don't want the responsibility in it, you're not sticking around to mentor them through it and teach them and help them after the fact. You just assigned a monetary value to it, then why are you doing it? And don't get me wrong, I understand everybody's got to make a living, everybody's got to make a buck, everybody's got bills to pay and stomachs to feed. But I think there is a significant responsibility there in working with it yourself, with teaching people about it. And, Stacy was exactly right. I very rarely hear a lot of people doing public readings being like, hey, it's your choice. I'm just telling you what it shows. And what might be right now is not right tomorrow or, 10 minutes from now. This is a current reading in this current
Right.
time, and everything changes,
Right.
And
That's a really good point.
it's kind of like that conversation with, the paranormal and teams and the content that they put out. They're not putting, hey, AI generated or for entertainment purposes only when they know it's fake, right? It's the same type of thing. Like there is a sense of responsibility, but again, like Stacy said, everybody has their own responsibility to either take the advice or to stop putting out the advice, make the choice of, your own personal convictions of why you do what you do and how you do it. And
Yeah,
then
there's also
anybody
a
who
fine
uses
line
it,
in that too. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
yeah,
As when you start doing readings for people, the reason I stopped doing readings for people was not because I would give bad news. I have no problem doing that. I'm very upfront and saying this is what's going to happen. Blah blah blah. Take it or leave it. What I had a problem with was that I would have people keep coming back to me. Oh, thing it just happened exactly the way you said. Everything. Turned. I lost you there for a sec. Uh, and they'd come back, and I was like, "Well, did you do anything to stop it? Did you, you know, try and prevent it? I mean, did you follow what I told you? No, no, it just totally happened the way you said." It's like, well, why did you even ask for advice in the first place? That kind of thing. And that's the part that frustrated me is because it became like Cassandra in ancient Greece. For those of you who don't know, Cassandra was cursed by Zeus for being able to know the future and have no one believe her. So she would actually tell people what the future was going to be as Oracle of Delphi, and the curse was no one believed a word she said, and it drove her absolutely mad, even though that she was right every time. Um, that's a thing unto itself. That's
Right.
what I felt.
Yeah, and like I think there needs to be like if you're gonna do these type of things, one you should have a code of ethics, and when you have to understand, and like I think even Jen was talking about this, is like the basically the power in the words that you're telling people, and you have to understand that, and people need to know sometimes that when they hear even something that may sound in the future, it may sound kind of bleak, but the future is not always set in stone. There's sometimes a lot of ways that can be changed, but also too referring people to the proper support structures too. Sometimes where maybe it's marriage counseling, maybe it's to the church, maybe it's to medical, maybe it's to therapy, things like that. But having a referral system too, to where when you are helping and you do come across some of these people, because in a way you almost become a therapist. And when people start showing up for readings daily, that's actually not healthy. And I think Stacy alluded to that earlier, where he was like, yeah, sometimes, it's too much. It's like, all right, but that's where you have a problem, right? So this is where a good, say diviner or something should be able to refer them, say, hey, look, you're going to need to see a therapist for sure. That's going to help. Or again, set them in the proper way.
Yeah,
Yeah, we talked
absolutely.
about that a little bit with the residentials, and the responsibility that we have with people that we take on as clients and how we approach it. Having that support structure and that referral system, and kind of knowing personal boundaries and maintaining healthy balance in it. It's interesting to me how all of it seems to intertwine together. Like every time we have one of these conversations, we're going back talking about psychology, we're talking about residential investigations, we're talking about history, we're talking about all these different things, all these different aspects, because every time it all circles back.
Confirmation bias.
Well, it's the human condition too. Everybody's is experiencing the human condition, and you're born, you live, you die, and then what happens after that? It's all part of that human condition.
Well, folks, I think we had a really good episode. I hope everybody in the chat enjoyed tonight. If you did, again, like and share, please. This is what helps to build this up out there, and that's what gives us the ultimate compliment. And even if you don't share it, at least click that like button, guys. But we will see you next week. We don't have a subject just yet, so if you have a suggestion, send it to us. Message us. Hit us up on social media. If you hear a subject and you're like, hey, we really want to know more about this, and we may be able to dive into some specifics. We may be able to do entire episodes on like the Oracle of Delphi or something. I don't know. Like we might be able to dive into some individual stuff, or even the I Ching stuff. Who knows? Whatever. Like we could dive into some things. But guys, we will see you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.